Okay, so he is speaking on toy model for bags of gold and monogamy paradoxes. Mr. Jagdeep Chakravarti, please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. And thank you, organizers, for inviting me to this conference where we have seen many fantastic talks over the past few days. So today I'm going to present my recent work on aspects related to black hole information. The title of my talk is Toy Models for Bags of Gold and Monogamy Paradoxes. And this is based on a paper, this is based on two papers, basically one on this overcounting of interior excitations and another on monogamy paradox with Tunir and Priyadashi, who are two junior graduate students at ICTS. So the broad theme of this talk is to, the underlying theme of this talk is to pose these paradoxes using bulk effective field theory and to precisely understand what goes wrong while using such a description. I'll shortly motivate and describe these paradoxes and also describe possible resolutions in my talk from the bulk perspective. So let's start with the discussion of the bags of gold paradox. So let me briefly outline what we are going to look at in this part. So the paradox is basically the fact that certain space-like slices, for example, Hartmann-Maldacena surfaces, which go inside the black hole interior, become very large in volume at late boundary times. And these large volume slices can host a considerable number of semi-classical excitations, which is far higher than what the Bekenstein-Hawking entropy suggests. And this is known as the bags of gold paradox. Now, our proposed resolution is that these interior excitations, these bulk interior excitations are really overcounted. That is, semi-classical bulk states placed far apart from each other in the interior are seemingly orthogonal. However, these states have small but significant inner products between them, which deviates from the semi-classical expectation of zero inner products. So roughly, the situation is something like this on the right-hand side. So this is our eternal Schwarzschild black hole, and we have a Hartmann-Maldacena slice at some boundary time t, and we have placed these excitations, excitations far apart from each other. These bumps denote these excitations, and these are placed far apart from each other in the interior. So one can keep on adding a large number of these excitations and overcount this Bekenstein-Hawking entropy. So how do we place these excitations? So first, let's discuss what this slice is. So we are interested in the maximum volume of slices which end at u0, 0 on the left horizon and 0, u0 on the right horizon. And the volume of these slices grows proportionally to log of u0. The excitations are placed on these slices by acting with unitary operators on the right CFT in the thermofield double state. So these states are constructed using the state-dependent formalism of Suvrat and Kyriakos, where this U of t is basically a unitary operator acting on the right CFT, and HR is the right CFT's Hamiltonian. Now one can place multiple excitations in a similar fashion. So so one can place multiple excitations in the similar fashion due to the fact, by utilizing the fact that the time-like coordinate t in the exterior becomes a space-like coordinate in the interior upon the propagation of these excitations. So we can create another excitation in the interior of this particular form, psi2, where the action of the Rindler Hamiltonian using factors of e to the power plus minus I HRT spatially separates this first excitation from the second one. And since the exterior time-like coordinate becomes space-like in the interior, these excitations are placed far apart from each other if t is large enough. We can generate a number of such excitations similarly and arrive at this particular picture of m excitations in the interior. So to work within effective field theory, we'll generate these excitations with small back reaction. For k excitations, we'll ensure that the number density of excitations, rho, which is simply k divided by the volume of this slice, is finite in the thermodynamic limit, that is with k and v large. And this allows us to calculate the entropy of these EFT excitations by treating the system as a dilute gas of excitations living on the slice. So the expression for the entropy is just given by S is proportional to the volume, where we have calculated this using the standard microcanonical ensemble by utilizing the fact that this system is a dilute gas of excitations. And we know that this volume grows proportional to log of U naught. So really this entropy grows proportional to log of U naught as we go to later and later times. And this gives rise to the paradox. So our proposed resolution is that even though we have constructed these excitations to be in such a fashion that they are spatially separated far apart, there is small inner products from this. There are small inner products between them. So let us understand this thing in detail. So the paradox arises due to a huge overcounting of this bulk Hilbert space. In semi-classical gravity, the inner product between two bulk states is given by an exponential. So if you take the inner product between two different bulk states, this has an exponential factor of e to the power minus n times v, where n is just the central charge of the associated CFT, or it can be thought of as 1 by g Newton. And v is the phase space separation between these two metrics. However, this description is really misleading when the phase space distance between the between the corresponding classical configurations is very large. In particular, when the distance is very large, we expect that the inner product between these states go to 0. However, the inner products do not really go to 0, but develop a saturated fat tail of order e to the power minus n. So this really is the motivation for our proposal, and consequently, this explains why the excitations are not really independent. So let us count how many bulk excitations can we fit using a smaller Hilbert space. So consider a Hilbert space of dimension n, and our problem is to calculate what is the maximum number of vectors m which satisfy the following relation. That is, these vectors are normalized and they have a very small inner product between each other, which we quantify by saying it's of the order epsilon. Now, what is the solution to the problem? The solution is that unit vectors in this Hilbert space live on the surface of a 2n minus 1 dimensional real sphere, and one can estimate the total number of these vectors by dividing this 2n minus 1 dimensional real sphere surface area with the area of an exclusion zone. So what is this exclusion zone? The exclusion zone is basically the fact that if we have a vector vi, so if we try to put another vector vj which is very close to this vi, then this second condition in our problem will be violated. So really there is a exclusion region around this vi in which no other vector can exist. And so we are dividing this surface area of this 2n minus 1 dimensional real sphere with the area of this exclusion zone, and using this we can find that the maximum possible vectors for a small epsilon goes something like n into e to the power n epsilon square by 2, which is really a very large number. And this is how we think that all these bulk excitations are really encoded in a smaller Hilbert space. And this is why we think that this entropy is really correctly counted by the Bekenstein-Hawking entropy, but in the using effective field theory, we have a higher number of, we have a seemingly larger entropy than the Bekenstein-Hawking entropy. So we performed some checks for this. So we also showed that there is no paradox in the CFT using our form of using the form of interior excitations that we considered, that is these kind of interior excitations. We showed that there is really no paradox in the CFT. And we also posed the paradox for single-sided pure state black holes and demonstrated why there are small inner products between candidate interior excitations of order e to the power minus n. And such excitations lead to qualitative and quantitative differences in the spectral observables like level spacing distribution and the spectral form factor as well. And within small n matrix models, we demonstrated how candidate interior excitations can again lead to an overcounted Hilbert space. So before I go further, are there questions regarding this?
Hi. Yeah.
Yes.
One question. So on the previous slide, the estimation is n times e to the power n epsilon square by 2, right?
Yes.
Now the proposal is that epsilon is what? E to the minus n capital N?
Yeah, the inner products are of this particular order. Yes, there is a fat tail of order e to the power minus n.
So it's not too much, right? So how do you explain? I don't know.
Oh no. So the point is like even a very small difference in this between this n and e to the and epsilon can lead to, see, this factor is really exponentiated. So if n into epsilon square is a small quantity, then this will be exponentiated, right?
I mean, e to the power 0. I mean,
No, it's not exactly 0. That's the point.
Yeah, but not too much, right? I don't know the orders, how much you have to explain, but it seems that it's not too much.
Well, even if let's say if this saturated fat tail has some if this order e to the power minus n is some e to the power minus delta, and the actual dimension is some e to the power n. So if delta is less than 1, this becomes a large number, and this in addition to that, you are again exponentiating that. So it's really a large number.
Okay.
Abhijit, just to be clear, n epsilon square can be very large.
That n, that small n, his thing should be thought of as capital N itself, right?
Yeah, so that small n,
Yes.
and I notation, but small n is a number of states, but n epsilon square can still be very large even if epsilon is small, as long as epsilon is larger than 1 over square root n. So if epsilon is 1 by n to the 4th, this becomes m can be much larger than n.
Yeah, but epsilon seem to be of order e to the minus n or something. Or
No,
not?
so no. Epsilon is not of order. I think this n, I'm confused in notation, but epsilon is of the order of is larger than 1 over square root of small n in this notation. If I understand correctly, Joydeep can correct.
Thank you.
Is that Joydeep?
Yeah.
No, I mean, what is this here? Oh, order of e to the minus n in the next slide.
I think small n is e to the power small n is e to the power
E to the power capital N. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, so I'll move on to this toy model of monogamy paradox. Then, so the goal here is to investigate a toy model in empty flat space, which captures essential features of the monogamy paradox for old flat space black holes using a clean calculation framework. And in general, there exists no nice way to calculate entanglement measures in bulk from the perspective of bulk gravity. However, we can formulate the monogamy paradox in terms of monogamy of CHSS correlators, which we use to quantify monogamy of entanglement. So let me briefly describe what is this monogamy paradox first. The monogamy paradox within effective field theory is the statement that ingoing and outgoing pair-produced Hawking quanta are maximally entangled, and thus the outgoing Hawking quanta cannot be entangled with other escaped Hawking quanta. So we are making a toy model in order to analyze this paradox. And within effective field theory, we show that the entanglement of approximately local bulk modes just outside the light cone, which is this region B, with the entanglement of this region with modes just inside the light cone, which is this region A, as well as with modes situated far away at the past of future null infinity, which is this region C. The entanglement between these three regions give rise to a order 1 violation in the statement of monogamy of entanglement. And this is the paradox which we are dealing with. So here these regions A, B, and C are spherically supported. So let us understand the monogamy of entanglement, the statement of monogamy of entanglement first. So we start with the construction of a CHSS operator in quantum mechanics, which is essentially a convenient way of understanding Bell inequalities. So to do this, let us consider two sets of operators A's and B's, which are defined such that their operator norm is less than 1 and they commute. And the CHSS operator is this combination of these operators A's and B's, where for classical observables, the CAB is bounded by 2, whereas in quantum mechanics, CAB can violate this 2, but it has an upper bound of 2 root. Similarly, one can again construct another set of operators is C1 and C2, which satisfy this operator norm is less than 1, as well as it commutes with the other operators AIs and BIs. And using this, we can construct another CHSS operator CAC. And the statement of monogamy of entanglement is that this CHSS operator of this AB regions and this AC region squared should be less than equal to 8. So this is a fairly strong statement. In other words, there cannot be a scenario where both systems AB and AC possess a non-classical description. So if CAB is greater than 2, it implies that CAC is less than 2. However, using gravity, we will show that there exists a violation of this statement of monogamy of entanglement in effective field theory, leading to this paradox. Okay, so how do we do this in scalar field theory? The fact that this operators A, B, and C commute is given is same as saying that smeared operators on regions A, B, and C are separated by space-like separated regions. And in general, the global vacuum of any field theory is highly entangled. In particular, the global state for our scalar field theory is a thermofield double when written using Riller modes. So let us start with the calculation of CAB first. So we can define this operators alpha S, where S is A, where S are the regions A and B using Riller smearing, and we demand that they are supported in a very small interval near this light cones, near this very close to this light cone. We will need another operator which is the projector onto the SS vacuum, and we can use that to write down these Bell operators in field theory, which are the following combinations. These combinations might look a bit messy, but the point is these operators resemble standard spin operators when expressed in 0-1 basis. So the state here, which we consider here, is the global vacuum state. To calculate the CAB, we first write down these operators alphas in terms of global creation and annihilation modes. And the goal now is to write the CHSS correlator as a function of Bogoliubov coefficients H and G, which we can easily extract. We can easily extract out this Bogoliubov coefficients in certain limits. And finally, we can arrive at this expression for CAB, which is 2.39 using our choice of operators and states, which is greater than 2. So this up to this part is fairly straightforward, that one can calculate this CHSS correlator in scalar field theory. Now we will look at how to calculate this CHSS operator CAC. So the key ideas for this calculation of CAC are as follows. So the first thing is that there is this Rietsche property, which is that we can create operators QI which support in the region C, which mimic the actions of BIs or AIs on the vacuum state. So this is the region C, and one can create operators QI which mimic the actions of these operators BI. Here S denotes the super translation sector, and however these operators QI are really unbounded. So we need to construct bounded operators CI from QI so that we can use them in CHSS correlations. To do that, we will use the fact that the Hamiltonian of gravity is a boundary term and construct observables using the same. So the observables which we are looking at are the projectors onto the vacuum state. So it was pointed out in these works that there exists a very nice way of looking at these projectors, which is we just exponentiate the ADM Hamiltonian and multiply it with a number and take the number, take A goes to infinity. So if we can also get a better choice of projector which projects onto below an IR scale delta, and we can use these projectors to construct these CI operators which are bounded as well as which acting on the states give us the action of the operators BIs acting on the state. Now so let me just arrive at the paradox. So we have constructed out operators CIs which when acting on the state give us the action of BIs acting on the state. So we arrive at the conclusion that this CAC is really a CAB plus some small corrections. However, if we now square these two guys up and add them, it's some 11.4, which is greater than 8. So earlier we had this statement about monogamy of entanglement that the CAB square plus CAC square should really be less than 8. But using this our construction, we have essentially arrived at a order 1 violation in the monogamy of entanglement. So this is the paradox in this context. Now the resolution of the paradox is that spatially separated observables probe the same underlying degrees of freedom, That is, such observables do not act on a non-factorized Hilbert space. So one default assumption which went into this kind of construction was that these observables don't really act on a factorized Hilbert space. We assume that this, since these regions A, B, and C are space-like separated, this can be thought of as a factorized problem, but it's not so. So this circumvents the conflict with monogamy of entanglement. And the factorization of our theory is Hilbert space on spatial partitioning grounds, which is an implicit assumption, is simply incorrect. This is supported by the fact that if we use the Gauss constraint to calculate Bi and Cj, this is not equal to 0 in gravity. Whereas in effective field theory, we will find that this thing is equal to 0, even when there is a phase-like separation. And another way to understand this is as follows. The degrees of freedom in region C already contain information about the A and B regions, which is known as the principle of holography of information. And this is written nicely in this review. So what is the conclusion of our talk? So in our talk, we have looked into two paradoxes from the bulk perspective, the bags of gold paradox, which can be resolved using small gravitational corrections, while the monogamy paradox requires order 1 corrections. Both models demonstrate why effective field theory construction fails to a certain extent and requires us to go beyond the same. The case of bags of gold requires quantum gravity corrections, that is the fact-tail effects for its resolution. In contrast, the monogamy paradox arises due to the assumption that the Hilbert space does not factorize upon spatial partitioning. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Jaideep, for a very nice talk, and completely in time. So we have 5 minutes for questions and answers on the talk. Is there any question? Any hand raised? Yeah. I see any hand raised by any question on the talk of the speaker?
I have a question.
Yeah, I can see one hand raised by Deepan Beta. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, sir. In the exclusion
Please
region.
go ahead, Deepan Beta.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. In the exclusion regions which you are defined in the space slice, how are the radius of the spheres modified at the boundary of the slice?
You mean in this problem, right? This. So here what we are doing is we are counting the number of vectors which have small inner products that can be embedded into a smaller Hilbert space.
Yes.
So there is an exclusion zone because of the fact that we really want this inner product between two different vectors to not exceed epsilon.
Yeah.
If we try to put a vector inside this region, inside very close to this another vector, then this inner product will be violated, right? So that defines an exclusion zone.
Yes.
So what we do is we take this whole real sphere and divide it by the exclusion zone to get an estimate.
Okay, so if we take a space slice and we consider the boundary areas, in that case, how are the exclusion zone?
Oh, I see. So you cannot. So the point is this: that we are not allowing these excitations to be very close to each other. If they are very close to each other, then they will obviously have a larger inner product, right?
Yes.
So from the boundary perspective, we are sending in this. So in order to construct the initial state which corresponds to this system, we do not send in these deformations very close to each other. We separate them by large times.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so I think there is no more questions, and they were already asked during your presentation. So let us thank Jaideep again for a very nice talk. And I think this session gets over with this last talk of this.